The Life of Dr. Livingston, Part 14. The beginning of Chapter 16, or not, the beginning of Chapter 6 happens to be Dr. Livingston's journey through Angola on his return to Linyanti was exceedingly slow. He was detained at different times by different causes. Illness at times kept him laid up. Then again, he would depart from his direct route to the left or right with object of examining the country. At other times, he was detained by the excessive hospitality of his Portuguese friends. His descriptions of the country on his return are not so rose-colored as those accompanying his journey to the coast, and though he loses none of the kind feelings for the colonists, he is compelled to admit that they have not done so much for the natives and the country as they ought to have done, and that under English control the country would have been far more prosperous and wealthy. It is in speaking of some of the native tribes who have here preserved their identity against most untoward circumstances that he asseverates that no African tribe has ever been yet destroyed. He remained some time at Cassange and then proceeded for a very considerable distance by the same route upon which he had traveled on the previous journey. On account of the fever, he made very slow progress. When he approached the vicinity of Lake Dilolo, he took a different course, and the object of more particular examinations into the portion of the country than he had before been able to make. The result being some remarkable and interesting discoveries in respect to the geography and geology of this portion of the globe. In that extensive, undefined border country between the territory of the Makolo and that of Balanda, there is a vast level plain, which during the rainy season may be described not inaccurately as lakes and immense superficial area, but of no great depth of water. In the midst of all is Lake Dilolo, from which flows the Latamba River, a small body of water which appears to form the watershed of the African continent, certainly the vast portion known to South Africa. It seems to be established that this river is the one side of Lake Dilolo flows northward into the Kasai, a confluent of the Congo, emptying into the Atlantic Ocean, and the other side flows southward to the Liambai, which under the name of Zambezi discharges its waters into the Indian Ocean. A statement so singular should be related in the words of the explorer himself. On June 8, 1855, he forded the Latemboa a short distance to the northwest of Lake Dilolo, and he then goes on to say, quote, "The Latemboa here is about a mile wide, about 3 feet deep, and full of lotus, papyrus, arum, mat rushes, and other aquatic plants. I did not observe the course in which the water flowed while crossing, but having noticed before that the Latemboa on the other side of Lake Dilolo flowed in a southerly direction, I supposed that this was simply a prolongation of the same river beyond Dilolo, and that it rose in its large marsh, which had not been seen in our progress to the northwest. But when we came to the southern Latemboa, we were informed by Shakastawala that the river we had crossed flowed in the opposite direction, not into the Dilolo, but into the Kasai. This phenomenon of a river running in opposite directions struck even his mind as strange, and though I did not observe the current simply from taking it for granted that it was towards the lake, I have no doubt that his assertion, corroborated as it was by others, is correct, and that the Dilolo is actually a watershed between the river systems that flow to the east and to the west. I would have returned in order to examine more carefully this most interesting point, but having had my lower extremities chilled in crossing the northern Latembua, I was seized with vomiting of blood, and besides saw no reason to doubt the native testimony. This distance between Dilolo and the valleys leading to that of the Katsai is not more than 15 miles, and the plains between are perfectly level. And had I returned, I should only have found that this little lake Dilolo was giving a portion to the Kasai and another to the Zambezi, distributes its waters to the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. I state the fact exactly as it opened to my mind, for it was only now that I apprehended the true form of the river system and continent. I had seen the various rivers of the country on the west side flowing from the subtending ridges into the center, and had received information from natives and Arabs that most of the rivers on the eastern side of the same great region took a somewhat similar course from the elevated ridge there, and that all united in two main drains, the one flowing to the north and the other to the south, and that the northern drain found its way out by the Congo to the west and the southern by the Zambezi to the east. I was thus on the watershed, or highest point of these two great systems, but still not more than 4,000 feet above level of the sea, and 1,000 feet lower than the top of the western ridge we had already crossed. Yet, instead of lofty snow-clad mountains appearing to verify the conjunctures of the speculative, we had extensive plains over which one may travel a month without seeing anything higher than an anthill or a tree. I was not then aware that anyone else had discovered the elevated through form of the center of Africa. Lake Dilolo is described as a fine sheet of water, somewhat of a triangular shape, 6 or 8 miles long, and from one or two broad. Moende Dilolo, the lord of the lakes, was found to be fat, jolly fellow who lamented the paradox that when there were no strangers at the lake there was plenty of beer, and when strangers were there the beverage was always gone. He gave his guests plenty of manioc meal, however, and a generous supply of putrid buffalo meat. Flesh is never too far gone for these rather lazy natives, whose chief food is a tasteless manioc. Here the idolater of Central Africa and the epicure of fashionable civilization clasp hands over a common luxury, for tainted game and sauces in whose ingredients are the fluids of far-gone meats are greatly affected at our most stylish restaurants. On his way from Lake Dilolo to the south, the explorer met again his old friends Katema, Shinte, and Maneko. They treated him with cordial hospitality, and Maneko walked as if she did not talk less than on a former visit. On July 27, the expedition reached Libanta, and the travelers Makolo companions, who had been consistently faithful and most valuable to their friend, were once more home again. The party was welcomed, says Dr. Livingston, with demonstrations of joy such as I had never witnessed before. The women came forth to meet us, making their curious dancing gestures and loud lullaroos. Some carried a mat and a stick in imitation of a spear and shield. Others rushed forward and kissed the hands and cheeks of different persons of their acquaintance among us, raising such a dust as it was quite a relief to get to the men assembled and sitting with proper African decorum in the kolta. We were looked upon as men risen from the dead, for the most skilful of the diviners had pronounced all of us perishers long ago, that we'd all died. After many expressions of joy at meeting, I arose and, thanking them, explained the cause of our long delay, but left the report to be made by their own countrymen. Formerly I had been the chief speaker. Now I would leave the task of speaking to them. Potense had then delivered a speech of upward of an hour in length, giving a highly flattering picture of the whole journey and the kindness of the white man in general, and of Mr. Gabriel in particular. He concluded by saying that I had done more for them than they expected, and that I had not only opened up a path for them to the other white men, but conciliated all the chiefs along the route. The oldest man present rose and answered this speech, and among other things alluded to the disgust I felt at the Makololo for engaging in marauding expeditions against Lekuhelapetebe and Sebolamaravakalaya, of which we had heard from the first persons we met, and which my companions most energetically denounced as Meshuhele entirely bad. He entreated me not to lose heart, but to reprove Sekeletu as my child. Another old man followed with the same entreaties. The following day we observed as our thanksgiving to God for his goodness in bringing all of us back in safety to our friends. My men decked themselves out in their best, and I found that although their goods were finished, they had managed to save suits of European clothing, which, being white, with their red caps, gave them rather a dashing appearance. They tried to walk like the soldiers they had seen in Loanda, and called themselves my braves. During the service, they all sat with their guns on their shoulders and excited at the unbound admiration of the women and children. I addressed them all on the goodness of God in preserving us from all the dangers of the strange tribes and of diseases. We had a similar service in the afternoon. The men gave us 2 fine oxen to slaughter, and the women supplied us abundantly with milk, meal, and butter. It was all quite gratuitous, and I felt ashamed that I could not make any return. My men explained the total expenditure of our means, and the Libonates answered gracefully, "It does not matter. You have opened a path for us, and we shall have sleep." Strangers came flocking from a distance, and seldom empty-handed. Their presents I distributed among my men. The progress down the Baratos valley was a constant ovation. A perpetual succession of barbecues and a number of oxen brought forth to the welcoming slaughter was great enough to make a respectable herd. But on reaching Naliele, a number of Dr. Livingston's Makololo fellow travelers found an unexpected source of sorrow in the fact that their wives had taken to themselves other husbands. Most of them having more wives than one, they were not altogether without consolation, but it was plain that they did not at all relish the fact that while they had been toiling for 2 years, others had eaten their corn. The men who had married the only wives of the traveling Makolo were compelled to restore them, from which we may infer that ideas of the marriage relation in Central Africa, even at the best, are still far from orthodox. On the canoe voyage, hence to Linyanti, the craft, though moving near shore, was assailed by an immense hippopotamus, which, shoved against the boat, using its head for the purpose with such strength that it was almost lifted out of the water. Fortunately, no harm was done to life or limb at Linyanti, where Livingston arrived early September. He was received with great joy by the chief Sekeletu and his people.